Hello, everybody. Welcome back to vBrownBag. Tonight we are recording the last episode of our CKA exam prep series. We will be covering some last-minute exam prep tips with Tyler Hatton. In case you have not been watching or just wondering what we've covered so far, this is it. The 9 episodes that we have recorded, most of them in our Northern America show, some of them in the EMEA show. But we have covered all the domains of the exam so far, and now we're going to be hearing a bit about what you can do to get ready for that exam at the last minute. A couple housekeeping notes before we hand it over to our guest tonight, by the way. We would love it if you would get in on the conversation with us. We are on Twitter at vBrownBag. You can use that hashtag, or you can just use the Q&A right here in Zoom if you're watching live. Send your questions our way. I will share them with the host and we will get them answered. If you happen to be watching this on YouTube, yes, you can watch it live. You can head over to vbrownbag.com/brownbags and sign up for our various shows in our different regions and even different languages. If you're watching this live and didn't know that we have a YouTube channel, check it out, youtube.com/vbrownbag. We have all our previous videos up there, organized well into playlists by topic, by the way, including this series itself. There's a playlist with every episode except this one in there right now. And I think maybe one of the other episodes that is recording as well today in our EMEA time zone. So we'll have the full 9 episode series up there shortly for you all to watch and prep for your own CKA exam. I am Ken Nalbon. I'm your host today. Feel free to reach out to me on Twitter anytime you wish, by the way. I'm at Ken Nalbon. If you feel like you have something you'd like to share on vBrownBag, it could be technical, it could be career-oriented. If you're looking for a way to get into public speaking and you're not sure how to get started, reach out to us. We'll help you. Share your thoughts and ideas with us. Rehearse your presentation. We'd love to hear from you. Share back with the community. It's great. It's what we're all about. But our guest tonight is doing just that. Tyler Hatton is going to share with us some last minute exam prep tips. So I'm going to hand it over to you now. Tyler, you ready?
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Ken.
All right. I am stopping share.
All right, now the fun part. Let's see if I can share my screen without any technical difficulties.
All right.
Let's see. Let's see if Zoom is on my side today. I think that's it. Alrighty, can you see my screen?
Sure can.
Perfect. Thank you. And that was an awesome pitch, by the way. Now I want to watch all the videos on YouTube now.
Appreciate it.
So we have made it to the last week of the Kubernetes study series, or the CKA study series. And I guess kind of as a last section, what we thought we'd kind of cover was the CKA last minute tips. So you've registered for the CKA exam, you've gone through all the videos in the video series so far. What are those things that you really should kind of think about before you go into the CKA exam? And my goal today is to kind of share at least my top 10 tips that I at least always kind of take going into really any certification exam, but especially the CKA. And as Ken mentioned, my name's Tyler Hatton. I'm a solutions engineer at this company called F5 Networks. We make application delivery software and hardware. We do quite a bit in the Kubernetes space, although it's certainly not the focus for tonight. But if it's something you're interested in, I certainly have my contact information on here and my LinkedIn, and always feel free to reach out to me if you really have any questions about anything whatsoever. But just kind of to highlight something on the right-hand side, I do have all 3 of the Kubernetes certs, which is, I guess, a good thing and a bad thing. But I will say that makes me somewhat qualified in talking about the different tips tonight. I've gone through 3 of these exams now. I know to a certain level what is expected on the exam. I know what the experience is about. And I have a good idea, at least on some advice that I can provide other people on some things to think about going into the exam. So I'm hoping to share some of that tonight. But again, if you have any questions at all around F5, around Kubernetes in general, around the different Kubernetes exams, feel free to reach out to me. I'm generally a pretty open book on my feedback. I'm always happy to help other people. Just reach out. I'm always happy to answer any questions whatsoever. But before we go into the actual tips for the exam, I thought something to kind of cover it just at a very high level, and I know this has been covered in the past couple of weeks bit by bit, and that's around what to expect in the exam itself. Going into exam, what is the experience like? What are some things that you should really know? when you take that exam and when you're preparing for it. And I highlighted really 7 different things here that I kind of want to call out, and I'll talk through these a little bit. But the first one, just to kind of call out, and I would hope you know this at this point. If not, well, that's a bit unfortunate, but it's good now you know, which is the CK exam is a hands-on exam. It's a practical exam. So instead of multiple choice, like most certifications, it is an exam where you really have to be comfortable with using a Linux CLI. You have to be comfortable with using basically the kubectl or kubectl or kubecontrol command, wherever the heck you want to call it. You have to be comfortable with that command and basically applying that knowledge to build different resources within a Kubernetes environment and to pull information about the different Kubernetes environments that you're going to basically be interacting with and carrying out tasks against as part of this exam. So that's the first thing to call out. If you didn't know it, it is a practical exam. There are no multiple choice questions, which is awesome and a terrifying thing at the same time. So keep that in mind. And we'll cover in a little bit just kind of some things that you can do to really get prepared and really having the knowledge necessary to apply those different practical steps that you'll be carrying out as part of the test. The second thing to call out as part of this exam is it's remotely proctored. So the nice thing about this exam is you can honestly take it from almost anywhere. You're going to be connecting from your own computer. You're going to be connecting with a proctor, basically a person on the other side, using kind of Zoom or WebEx type software. It's not Zoom or WebEx, but it basically works that way. And you'll be sharing your screen with them. It's really a kind of a blessing and a curse at the same time. So that it's a blessing because you can take your test anywhere. It's a curse in that it's kind of a pain to at least get the initial setup with that proctor. And I'll talk about, at least as part of my tips, how you can save a little bit of time and getting through kind of that initial setup process with that proctor, where they'll basically check out your room and have you wave around your webcam around your room and check your surroundings to make sure you're not cheating. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. But just recognize that for this exam, you're not going into a testing center. It's from your own machine. You can take it from almost anywhere. You have to be in a enclosed room by yourself. But outside of that, it's a pretty flexible test and where you can take it, which is really nice. The third thing to kind of call out as part of the exam is it's open book. This is frankly something that is pretty awesome when it comes to the CKA exam, especially considering it's a practical exam. So when I say open book, basically you can use anything on the kubernetes.io/docs website. I believe the CNCF provides a full list of links or URLs that you're allowed to use for each of the exams. But honestly, for the CKA, what you'll primarily be using is the kubernetes.io/docs website. That's the only website I used when I took the exam. And I'll talk about a little bit later on how you can best utilize that documentation. So looking at the practical exam piece, it might be a little bit terrifying, but the good news is it's open book. So that'll save you a little bit of time.
Short question there, Tyler. I've heard people mention this before. It's open book. You can use the docs. Is that access to the docs within the testing environment only? Because I know some of these remote proctored exams, they don't let you have any other windows open. Or can you use like your own browser window on your computer where you have bookmarks to the docs, your favorite sections and stuff like that?
Oh, you're getting a little bit ahead of things, but
sorry. Well,
no.
You can tell me, hold on, I'll get to that then.
Yeah. So to answer one of your questions around multiple windows, so the nice thing is this multiple monitors piece right here. So unlike most remote exams for the CKA and for all the Kubernetes exams, they allow you to have multiple monitors. However, they only allow you to have basically 2 windows open. And one of those windows is going to be the exam. So where it's basically just a web page that gives you the tasks that you have to carry out as part of the exam. And then your terminal window is part of that kind of browser window all in one screen. And then the second browser window that you're going to have open is the actual documentation. So if you do have the ability to use 2 different monitors, it's something I would encourage you to do, because on one screen you can have your documentation and on the other screen you can actually have the test screen where you're actually interacting with the Kubernetes environment and seeing the different tasks that are associated with the exam. Now, from a bookmark standpoint, I'll talk about that in a second, but from a bookmark standpoint overall, you can use bookmarks as part of the exam, and that is certainly an advantage that you can take going into the exam from a prep standpoint when looking at different content that you want to use as part of the documentation before you take the CKA. Does that kind of answer your question?
It does. And while we were talking, Stephanie asked, what about a camera? I assume that you have to have some kind of webcam for them to be able to view you during the exam.
Yeah. So on the right hand side, what I provided is basically the full list of instructions that like the CNCF or Linux Foundation gives you. But one of the requirements for the exam is a webcam. And when I say webcam, it has to be like separate from your computer. So you can't really use a laptop webcam, or you're kind of discouraged to use one. You have to use kind of like a USB based webcam. And the reason why they ask for that is when you start the exam, they basically have you show the proctor your room, or basically your surroundings. So they want to make sure that you're the only person in the room. They want to make sure, you don't have some like hidden piece of paper or cheat sheet behind your keyboard. It's a whole process that they basically make you go through just to ensure that you're not cheating for the exam. So one of the ways to make that a little bit easier is just to have a separate USB webcam to, again, show them the room that you're in. So yes, you do have to have a webcam, unfortunately. It's one of those requirements, and I believe they do call that out as part of their instructions.
Cool, thanks.
Cool. So as I mentioned, it's completely open book exam. You can use bookmarks as part of the exam, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And that certainly saves you a significant amount of time when you're searching through the documentation. For the exam itself, you only have 2 hours to complete it. So honestly, for me and for most people, I think, who take the CK exam or really any of the Kubernetes exams, the biggest challenge you're going to run into is time. It is a race against the clock. So it might be open book, but you really have to figure out how you can best utilize your time searching through that documentation to get the answer you need to fulfill the task that's placed in front of you. I will say, when I took the CKAD and the CKS, which were the 2-hour exams I took, I was down to probably the last 5 minutes when I got down to the last task. So it is, certainly a challenging exam when it comes to time, but from a question standpoint, I would say that what they ask you is pretty reasonable. They don't really ask you something that's going to take you 30 minutes to configure, to be honest. But at the same time, you still always have to watch the clock and just be very quick in what you're doing. And I think the good part about that is it ensures, I guess, a certain level of expertise where you're not overly dependent on the documentation. So again, keep that 2 hours to complete in mind. Again, it's probably the biggest challenge, I would say, to the exam. It's not necessarily the questions, it's getting through the tasks in that amount of time that they give you. And to the number of questions they give you, it's about 15 to 20 questions. And the one thing I will call out as part of the exam is not each of those questions are equal. So it will tell you on each question the amount of percentage points that question makes up of the exam. And that's something to kind of keep in mind from a time management standpoint. So, for example, let's say you have two questions left. There are 2 different tasks left as part of the exam that you need to complete. Maybe you have one that's 3% of the exam and one's that's 10% of the exam. Well, if you only have 5 to 10 minutes left, maybe you want to do the 10-minute or the 10% one first, I should say, in that small amount of time that you have. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. Again, it does show you the percentage amount that each question gives you. So keep an eye on that, and it'll be something to kind of see when you take the exam. I talked about the multiple monitors piece, but the final thing I'll call out is the free retake. So this is something I think people often ignore when they take the CK exam, but you get a free retake. So, let's say after all your studying, unfortunately you fail the exam. I've known people that have had this happen. Well, the good news is you're not out your $350 or whatever it is. You get a free retake. You can go back and retake that exam again with all the knowledge that you have from the previous time you took that exam. And that honestly is a great thing to have, because again, you don't feel like you wasted a whole bunch of money for nothing. You can again take all that knowledge and go back and retake that exam. So that's a final thing I would kind of call out, just as something to expect for the exam is, you get to the point where you're at the end of the exam, you feel terrible about it, maybe you fail it. Well, it's not a big deal. It's not a big deal at all. You just spent 2 hours of your time, and guess what? You can retake it again for free, and it's not a big deal at all. So just something to call out. And the whole reason why I kind of call out all these different things is mostly because when I took the CK exam, honestly, it was somewhat intimidating for me, right? It's a hands-on exam. There's a lot of different things they have on that syllabus. You really don't know what to expect. So you kind of, I guess, overly expect or assume there's going to be a whole bunch of different things on the exam, or too many things for you to possibly know. And I can tell you for a fact that that's not the case. It's a reasonably challenging exam, but it's not impossible to pass. And I've known plenty of people that pass the exam. And if you don't pass it again, you get a free retake. So calling all those things out is just something to expect. But now onto the tips. And by the way, Ken, this is why I said a couple minutes ago, we're getting a little bit ahead of things. But my first tip that I will have for everybody that's watching this video or is on this call right now is build a bookmark list. And from a time-saving standpoint, this will probably be the biggest factor going into the exam. So one of the cool things, as I mentioned for this CKA, is for like your toolbar, your bookmark toolbar for your browser. So in your case, you're probably going to be using Chrome. For your bookmark toolbar, you can create a whole folder of different bookmarks that you can use as part of the exam that point to different pieces of the Kubernetes documentation. And the way that I kind of imagine this in my head, just as kind of a physical equivalent to it, is for SANS Institute exams, those are open book too, but they're like multiple different books. So what people do is they like to this indexing method, which you kind of see on the left-hand side here. So they do these colorful bookmarks and they have this index page, and that's how they save time in taking these open book SANS exams. But in your case, because it's all digital, you get this massive bookmark folder that you can use. And for these bookmarks, a place to look for these is, so I put a link down here for one that I found on Reddit, and I'll show the link right here. And this is just a GitHub page. But there are a ton of people online who have posted links to their bookmarks that they use for the exam. So just look around. You'll find somebody's bookmark list that they've used. Honestly, this list right here is pretty great. Just looking at the list of content that they've linked to right here. But certainly go through kind of the syllabus that the CNCF provides you and look at those different sections, and then ask yourself, to kind of fulfill the knowledge for this section, what's a good bookmark from the Kubernetes documentation that I might need or might be helpful going into the exam? And knowing that will certainly save you a lot of time. And one final thing I'll mention here. So what I show on the right-hand side, at least on this slide, is my own bookmarks from the CKS exam. When I took the CKA, I actually didn't have a bookmark list because I didn't know they were allowed at that time. So what I did instead is I actually memorized different keywords that I could put into the Kubernetes documentation search engine. And I would use that as kind of my guide to get through the different questions. So if you're scared of using bookmarks, you can memorize different terms to feed into the search engine as an alternative.
Cool. Hey, Tyler, you know how you said I was going kind of forward in time with my question about bookmarks earlier? I'm going to go back in time now because I missed a question earlier. Stephanie was asking when you're talking about retakes, how many days before you can take a retake if you need one?
Oh, shoot. I don't know. I know they have it documented somewhere. It's probably a week or two. I think that's usually the standard. But I'm guessing the Linux Foundation or the CNCF has that published somewhere.
Gotcha. When in doubt, consult the docs, basically.
Exactly. Yeah, I would. It's documented somewhere. I've never had to do a retake, or fortunately, I should say. So I don't know, but my guess is it's probably 2 weeks. That's pretty standard for these exams. Cool. All right. So the next thing you're probably asking is, what the heck should I bookmark? And something that I did a lot of when I took the CK exam and the CKD and the CKS is I used the docs to seed my manifests. So when it came time to actually writing the YAML and the manifests to create these different resources within Kubernetes, a way that I use, or a method that I use to save a lot of time, is I would just directly link to example manifests within the actual Kubernetes documentation. So I have two examples right here, but if I go into the actual Kubernetes documentation in my browser window, there it is. And the one that I have here is like using secrets as environment variables. This might be knowledge that you might need going into the exam. I don't know if it is anymore or not, but I'm showing this, right? And what you can do that's really cool when it comes to the documentation is if I click on this little link button right here, what this will do is basically set up a hash anchored link that will bring me directly to this place on this page when I bookmark it. So you see this little hash anchor right there. What that does is, again, is when I click on the bookmark, it'll directly put me on this part of the screen. And what's really nice about this is, let's say I do get on a question where it asks, hey, you need to create a pod or create a deployment that creates a container that uses a secret as an environment variable. What I can do is basically, click on that bookmark and then copy and paste this manifest and then change it based on the requirements that are dictated as part of the exam. So what I'm trying to say here is a really easy way of saving a lot of time when you take the exam is, instead of writing the manifest manually, which you can do, but I discourage it, instead of doing that, just find different pages within the Kubernetes documentation where it gives you examples, and then you can copy and paste from those examples and then change them to meet the needs of the question or the task that's given to you. So that's one easy way to save a ton of time. And again, you combine this with bookmarks and this idea that you can bookmark all these different example manifests within the documentation, that certainly will save you a significant amount of time when you're going through the exam. So look for those throughout the documentation. And the nice thing about the Kubernetes documentation is there's a ton of examples. So if anything, I think your challenge will be more figuring out the right things you want to bookmark as part of the exam, to kind of be more encompassing or to meet the most questions possible.
I'll bet. We did have another question come in, by the way. It's about multiple windows again, but it's specifically about the terminal. Sean is asking, is it a single terminal session that's open, or can you have multiple shells? And do they get reset between questions, or is it the same shell the whole exam? He likes to use aliases, and he's curious if you can set one time and use it after every task.
Yeah, so it is a, at least in my case, it was a single terminal session inside of a browser window, and that terminal session did carry on from question to question. So if you set up an alias for like kubectl, for example, that alias will carry on question to question. The one thing I will call out, though, and I don't think this is sharing too much information, is the exam might have you SSH into different hosts. So keep that in mind. You will be put on a jump host when you take the exam, but it might, as part of a question, it might require you to, for example, SSH into another host that's in that lab environment that you're put into. Cool. So yeah, calling that out. I don't think that's oversharing. That there's multiple servers within that lab environment, but
I don't think the CKA police are going to come after you for that now.
You never know. But yeah, keep that in mind. But yeah, you can certainly use aliases if you want to. In fact, I would encourage it if you're looking to maximize time savings. Cool. The third tip that I have, and the reason why I call this out, is I don't feel like in any of the Kubernetes documentation or tips that I've read, people have explicitly called it out, which is get comfortable with the text editor if you're not already today. and I say this and it might seem obvious, but I come from the perspective of, my first job was, being a Linux administrator and managing application servers within an all Linux world. So I was already very familiar with Vim and Nano and Emacs going into the exam, but not everybody is. So what I would say, if you're a Windows person, for example, sorry, but if you are going into the exam, really get comfortable with the CLI based text editor and get just comfortable with the Linux CLI in general. But really, most importantly, get familiar with Vim or VI. I think Nano's in the lab environment too. I didn't actually check, but I'm guessing it is. But certainly get familiar with the CLI based text editor if you aren't already, and that will again save you a lot of time when you take the exam, because you're not fumbling through Vim arguments and commands, and that whole nightmare. So I like this thing called Vim Adventures, because I always thought this was a really cool website where it basically is a nice little game where it has you walk through kind of the different Vim keys, and you go on a little adventure learning how to use Vim. So there you go. If you're looking for a method of learning Vim, here's a way of doing that without being a Linux admin for 5+ years of your life. So calling that out. And then the second thing I would call out too is get familiar with YAML. So I don't think it's sharing a massive secret about the exam, but you will be writing a lot of Kubernetes YAML manifests. And I would say it is a significant skill to have, to be familiar with YAML when taking this exam. And again, it was one of those things for me. I was kind of lucky because I'd been using Ansible for 3, 4, 5+ years before I had taken this exam or even started working with Kubernetes. So I was already pretty familiar with YAML. But if you aren't familiar with YAML, just kind of get familiar with the I don't know, the way that it's written, and the fact, in this case, like for a YAML tab, always use 2 spaces. So if you get a syntax error, an easy way of identifying that is just making sure that your spaces are correct, because YAML is white space sensitive, little things like that. And a good way or an easy way to get practice is maybe just manually writing manifests on your own instead of directly copying from the Kubernetes documentation. So that's kind of the 2 things I would kind of call out here: is get familiar with the CLI text editor if you aren't already. I know it seems obvious, but it isn't really called out before you take the exam. Hey, you should probably know how to use Vim. And the second thing I would call out is get somewhat familiar with YAML, because eventually what will happen, just working with Kubernetes in general, is you will get a syntax error around your YAML. It'll probably be white space related, and you're going to have to troubleshoot it. And being familiar with kind of the way that YAML is written is incredibly important, and will save you a lot of time when you run into those different challenges, both in the real world and on the exam. Do you have a question?
So I was just going to make a funny comment. I was going to make a joke about multiple terminals, saying you don't need them if you just know how to exit Vim. Well, now you're just telling people get to know Vim, and you're going to not have that problem. So good tip.
Yes, make sure you know how to exit Vim. Don't get stuck in Vim on the exam.
All right, thanks.
The fourth kind of tip that I have is, the nice thing about the CKA exam now is there is a ton of free and paid lab content out there today that will put you in a very similar environment that the CK exam puts you in, from a task and use case standpoint. So I put 2 examples out here. I'll show another example in just a moment, but one website, which is a paid website, is called killer.sh. A lot of people recommend this from a kind of CKA test simulator standpoint. I think it's maybe $20 to get to, what do they call them, tokens, to take 2 different practice exams. And I use killer.sh for the CKS. I did not use it for the CKA, but what I found, and the feedback that I've heard from other people who have used the simulators both for the CKA and the CKS, is the questions within the killer.sh simulator are a little bit more challenging than the real exam. However, what I will say about that is probably a good thing, because if you're good enough to pass an exam on killer.sh, you're probably prepared enough to pass a real CKA exam. And the other thing about killer.sh that I'll just call out too is the way that they set up your browser and they show the questions, like they display the questions, is very similar to how the real exam lays everything out. So again, if you're looking for a very realistic testing experience for the CKA exam without actually taking the exam, killer.sh is probably the best example or best simulator you're going to find. So, back to the kind of the earlier terminal question, if you want to get familiar with how the terminal works within the CK exam, maybe the killer.sh lab would be a good simulator to kind of test that out in. And then on the right-hand side, something else that I kind of called out here is Katacoda.com or Katacoda. There's a lot of people in the Kubernetes world that will talk about Katacoda, but really what Katacoda is about is these are ad hoc free labs that you can quickly get access to test out different Kubernetes use cases. So you can go to katacoda.com, you can create an account, and literally within seconds, less than a minute, you can get access to a Kubernetes playground and test out creating a deployment, meeting maybe certain parameters that you have, like, I don't know, providing a secret as an environment variable, like we showed earlier. And for me, when it came time to, last minute cramming, which is usually what I do on the last day before an exam, what I used a lot of was the Katacoda website. I would ask myself, okay, what do I not know how to do? Or what's something that I need to practice, like creating a deployment or maybe updating a deployment? And what I would do to quickly test out that use case and write the manifest to test out that use case is I would go to the Katacoda website, use the Kubernetes playground, and quickly test out that use case without ever spinning up a Kubernetes environment in my own personal lab. And that will save you a ton of time. No more setting up Minikube or dealing with kubeadm on your Raspberry Pis. Just use Katacoda. If you have a small use case, don't deal with all the management stuff. Just use Katacoda. You will save a ton of time when it comes to spinning up a new Kubernetes environment. And then the final resource I would just call out to, kind of switching screens right here, is there is this website called CodeCloud. It's highly recommended by just about anybody that's taken the CKA exam. And this was the first resource that I actually used studying for the CKA well over a year ago at this point. But you will often see this class on sale on Udemy for like, I don't know, $15 whenever Udemy does a sale, which is probably every 2 or 3 weeks at this point. So if you have the time, if you want some extra resources to practice for the exam, definitely take a look at this CodeCloud class around the CKA. It's certainly another additional resource that will help get you prepared for the CKA exam. And then the other thing I would call out just around CodeCloud in general is they also have labs and kind of questions and tasks that they will ask you to perform, very similar to the CKA exam as part of this class that they sell. So again, just another way of getting prepared for the exam, making sure that you have all the knowledge necessary to pass it the first time, and just giving the resources you need. So CodeCloud is certainly another one that almost everybody recommends it that I've talked to about the CKA over the years. So that's a fourth one. Ton of resources out there, and that's the awesome thing about taking the CKA exam now is there is no shortage of resources to prepare for the exam. And then the fifth tip I put right here is, and I kind of called it out earlier, is take advantage of the free retake. So, I had mentioned earlier that the CK exam, at least for me, was, and it can be incredibly intimidating for various different factors. But the thing I will call out is you always have that free retake. So if you're on the fence, you're like, well, I've prepared for 3 months now, but I still don't know if I'm ready for the CK exam. Just take it. If you fail the exam, you're going to be okay. You have that free retake. And again, now you know all the questions that were given to you on the exam. So you have a better idea where you need to prepare more on. So again, if you're on the fence, just take the exam. And I've known people that have used the free retake as basically a practice exam. they weren't sure if they were going to pass or not, but they're like, heck with it. I've been studying for this thing for a month now. I'm just going to take this exam, and if I fail it, I get it for a retake. So what I'm trying to do here is just give people confidence. If you're on the fence, just take it. It's not a big deal. The only thing that you've lost is 2 hours of your time, and if you failed it, hey, you get it for a retake. It's not like a CCIE or an OSCP where you've wasted a half day or a whole day or 2 days of your time taking this exam. It's 2 hours. It's not a big deal. Tip number 6. So this may not be as obvious, and maybe this is kind of a silly tip. So this is a picture of my desk, and I have a very cluttered desk, and I hate taking virtual exams because it forces me to clean up all the stuff on my desk. And the thing I will call out is before you take the exam, and again, it sounds like an obvious tip, but make sure you clean off everything possible on your desk. So like my Rodecaster you see on the left-hand side, and my little drawing screen, and my Stream Deck, all that has to go. Anything with the screen that isn't related to my monitors has to go. Those key lights you see up top, those have to go. Basically anything that isn't my monitors, my screen, or my monitor, sorry, and my camera and my keyboard and mouse, all those have to go. And anything behind my monitors, so if there's like written text back there, those have to go too. And what I will say in preparing for the exam, make sure you do this like a couple hours before you actually take the exam. And the reason why I say this is if you're like me, you're going to be doing a lot of last minute cramming and just kind of going through different notes that you have right before you take the exam. And there's nothing worse than getting to that proctor and they're like, oh, well, now you got to get rid of that key light, which happened to me last time I took the exam. Or I'll get another one that happened to me last time I took an exam, which won't happen in the CKA, but this happened to be on a HashiCorp exam, which is, oh, hey, now I want you to have you cover up those monitors with towels. Okay, you've never asked me to do that before, but okay. So what I'm trying to say here is get all that all that out of the way hours before you take the exam. So when you actually do get ready and when you have to talk to that proctor and go through the whole sign-in process, that only takes maybe 5-10 minutes of your time versus 20 minutes. And you'll be able to keep all that knowledge in your head that you've been trying to cram versus, getting a bunch of anxiety over, oh, hey, I got to clean up my desk now in order to get this proctor to approve me for the exam. So yeah, make sure you have a clean desk environment. Try to get that out of the way before you start doing some last minute cramming. It will be a significant help in kind of keeping that knowledge in your mind when you take the exam. Again, something that might be obvious, but I've gotten in so many of these virtual exams now where I'm just like, it's almost random what they ask me to do to get signed in. And then tip number 7, and I can't remember if this is set up already within the jump box or not when you sign in, but the 7th tip I would have is if it's not already configured, configure the shell autocomplete for your terminal window. So what this means is you can basically tab out the Kubernetes commands to autocomplete within your terminal window versus manually typing them all out, character by character. And again, from a time saving standpoint, this is significant. So instead of typing the whole word kubectl, maybe get pod, you can quickly type, or you can quickly tab out the word get and tab out the word pod. And again, it saves you quite a bit of time when you have to write these very complex commands to perform, very, very basic tasks within Kubernetes. So make sure you have autocomplete enabled, and where you can find that command to run is within the kubectl cheat sheet, which probably should be something that you should have bookmarked just as a quick page to refer to when you take the Kubernetes exam. So if you do have to enable autocomplete, which it might be enabled already, I can't remember, you have that there. And then something else that they kind of called out here is part of the cheat sheet, which I'm guessing is what somebody was asking about, is something else that people like to do is aliasing out kubectl and making it just K instead. So instead of typing up the whole command, you just type K. And what this does is this whole command, it sets up the alias, but also sets up the autocomplete. So you can do K get pod. So there you go. That's something else that you should kind of keep in mind is use autocomplete as much as possible and then bookmark the cheat sheet because there's a ton of great resources in there, including the autocomplete command. And then tip number 8. So I've heard a couple people bring this up and I agree with this, and I'll share my own personal example of where I've had to do this in one of the Kubernetes exams, but it's keep calm and move on if you don't know. So if you run into a question that you have no idea, you're like, I don't know where to start here. I don't have a bookmark for this question. I don't even know the keyword to look up to get an example manifest for this question. Skip it. Again, you have 2 hours to take the exam, and you'll probably be short on time, realistically. So if you have the option of skipping the question versus spending, who knows, 10 minutes, 15 minutes of your time trying to figure it out, just skip it and move on to the other questions. And if you have time at the end of the exam where you have time to take another look at that question, then take another look at it. There is no point in wasting and spending time on a question that you don't know. So yeah, don't be this guy in the middle who's rage quitting over a game of Catan. It's your Kubernetes exam. Yeah, don't be that guy. Just move on. It's not a big deal. And the other thing to call out too is not all the questions are scored equally. So if that question that you don't know is a question that's only 3% of the exam and the rest of them are the same or much higher, again, there's no point spending time on it. It's not worth your time. And in my example, so I actually ran into this on the CKS exam. I had a question where it's basically I didn't know. I remember I remember the topic and I remember studying for it, but for some reason when I got to the exam, my mind blanked on it and I couldn't remember the steps I had to perform to fulfill the task it was asking me to perform. So I skipped the question. And not only did I skip the question, I didn't work on the problem at all because I ran out of time on the exam and I still passed it. So you can skip a question, maybe 2 questions on the exam and still pass it. I barely passed the CKS, but I still skipped the question and got away with it. So yeah, don't get a bunch of anxiety. If you don't know the answer to a question or you don't know where to get started, just skip it, move on, and then go back to it if you have the time at the end of the exam. That would be my biggest advice just around the different questions on the exam.
Hey, you mentioned one thing though, Tyler, like, hey, don't worry about that question. Maybe it's only worth 3% of the exam. Is there any way of knowing that during the exam, like how much the score of a particular question is worth, or is it just you're guessing?
So each question it tells you, each question it will tell you, at least if I remember correctly, every question that I received, it will tell you the amount of percentage points that question makes of the exam. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty unique. Good to know.
Yeah, they're very, maybe even surprisingly transparent about that. So yeah, with these practical exams, right, I think one of the biggest things that people have to combat, and I say this including me, is just anxiety around the exam. Like you aren't given a ton of time and it can be very stressful to work on the fly. So again, there's no point in creating more stress for yourself, especially when it doesn't matter. Especially if it's like 2% of the exam. It's not worth the stress. Just move on.
Cool.
So the 9th thing I put up here, and again, this is obvious, but I've made this mistake before on the CKS exam again. But read the questions carefully. If it asks you to switch contexts, which is switching from one Kubernetes cluster to another from a configuration standpoint, make sure you switch contexts. Or if it asks you to name a resource, name a pod a certain name, make sure you name it that. These exams are, from my knowledge, graded through a script. I guess it could be graded manually, but my guess is it's graded through a script. Make sure you follow the directions very closely. And just calling out my own errors. And the reason why I put this tip in here is I made this mistake on the last Kubernetes exam I took when I was taking the CKS exam, and I passed the CK, passed the CKD. I don't know why this had to happen on the CKS, but when I was taking the CKS exam, and it's the same with all the exams, you're going to be interacting with multiple different clusters, and it will tell you, hey, for this question, you need to interact with this cluster. In order to do that, switch your context to blah. So maybe like context A or context B or context C. And that's the context that you're going to use for this exam question. Well, I, on the CKS exam, got through maybe 2 or 3 questions, and I realized, oh, hey, for these last couple of questions, I forgot to switch my context. And that really stinks, especially when you're time constrained. So again, getting all stressed out, I had to go back to the previous questions and basically re-perform those tasks they'd asked me to perform, but in the correct context. So that's why I call this out. Read the questions carefully. Make sure you're using the right context. You're connected to the right cluster, because it's a very easy error to make. Speaking from my own experience. And the other thing I would call out here too is, you're probably going to be doing this anyways, but what honestly saved me in this case was, luckily all the manifests that I had used to perform the previous tasks were still on my file system for the jump box. So I could just go back to those previous questions and apply the previous manifests where I could. So luckily I was able to save myself a little bit, but it's certainly not a situation that you want to be in. So read the questions carefully. that's a big word of advice that I provide you by taking this exam, because it's very easy to make a mistake. Luckily the questions are short in their length, and they're pretty straightforward, but it's still easy to skip a sentence in there like I did and get ahead of yourself because you're overconfident and you're like, I've taken the CK and CKD, I can do this. Yeah. Yeah, I got burned on that. So don't be me. If it asks you to switch a context, switch the context. So there's my 9th tip, again, speaking from my own experience. And then my 10th tip, and I this might be something unique to something that I do. I do this for every certification exam that I take nowadays, and I've taken a lot of them, to say the least. But if you have extra time at the end of the exam and you feel like you've done the best you can on all the questions, so you've completed them, something that I will do on basically every certification exam is I will take mental notes on what I thought I got wrong on the exam. So when you go through the exams, and it's the same with the CK, you can flag different questions if you want to. And I will often flag questions that I thought that I maybe got wrong, or maybe I should spend a little bit more time on. And the reason why I do this is I will take that list, and when it's like a testing center, you can write these down on a whiteboard, and I'll try to memorize it, which I do too. But you can take that list, and regardless of if you passed it or not, you can take that list and use it as almost like an exam postmortem. Okay, I've passed it or I failed the exam. What are those areas where I need to improve? And that is a great resource. So when it comes time to, maybe you did fail the exam, you have that list of areas where you need to improve after you've taken that exam, or after you failed that exam. You can take that for next time you take the exam. So I say this, I do this for almost all my exams now, where even for like an AWS exam that's completely multiple choice, I will go through my flag questions. I because I'm in a testing center, I will take the whiteboard and the whiteboard marker and literally write down the different concepts that I feel like I need to improve on, and then I'll try to memorize them. And I mean, you can't memorize a question word for word, but the overall topics that you need to improve upon. And that's just a great resource, again, if you've passed it or failed it. So again, maybe something obvious, but it's a resource. It's a great resource to have, especially if you failed the exam. So just calling that out. And then when I say notes too, so when you take this CK exam, they don't allow you to have any like white paper, real, pen, pencil, anything in front of you. You can't even have a whiteboard in front of you, but they do have a little notes section as part of the like testing console that they give you. So if you want to put notes in there, just for either later on, or maybe that you want to edit a manifest directly within that editor, which I don't know how well that would work. You could do that too. So there's a little notes section that they give you as part of the exam, but it's it's on your screen. It's not something physical. And then tip number 11. So a little bit of a bonus. So again, it might be obvious, but seriously, always keep learning. So the CKA exam in itself is the first in a series of 3 exams. I would certainly encourage anybody to take the CKAD and CKS if they have the time. They certainly build upon the knowledge that you have on the CKA. But I would say something to kind of keep in mind is with the CKA, you're really kind of dipping your toe in the water when it comes to Kubernetes in general. You're certainly building a great foundation there, and the fundamental knowledge that you have to know in order to really manage any Kubernetes cluster. But Kubernetes is a massive platform. There are a ton of integrations out there. There are a ton of underlying moving pieces that we have certainly talked about over the past couple of weeks. But really getting knowledge around those different components or different pieces, that's how you can grow. And one of the things I will say that I've kind of learned over the years when it comes to just taking certification exams in general is it does pay off to be a generalist. So just having basic knowledge around networking or how Kubernetes works behind the scenes, or even like I put on here DevOps, it's site reliability engineering, but even understanding the fundamentals of that, just being a good generalist and having knowledge across multiple different things is an amazing thing to have, and certainly makes taking these exams a lot easier. But one of the cool things just about the Linux Foundation in general is they have a whole training website where they have both paid and free content around different Kubernetes or really just general IT topics. And, I put a couple on here. So one I would recommend that I took not too long ago was Introduction to GitOps. A lot of people have used the term GitOps recently, and I don't think a lot of people use it correctly, to be honest. But if you want to learn a little bit about how GitOps works in the world of Kubernetes, there's a whole class, it only takes 2 to 3 hours or 2 to 4 hours of your time to take on the Linux Foundation website. So, just always keep learning. There's a ton of great resources out there. There's multiple Kubernetes exams, so you can take all 3 if you want to. Again, they're all great exams. They're all kind of similar, but they certainly build upon each other. And you'll continue to kind of grow this overall, kind of generalist knowledge of being a Kubernetes type of person. So take a look at those resources. Certainly don't make the CK exam your last one. There's always opportunity to grow more. And the final thoughts, I just say good luck. You can do it. Again, the CK exam is not an impossible exam. It's not even probably the most challenging exam I've ever taken, just to be honest. The thing I would tell anybody that's preparing for the exam is don't get too intimidated by the fact that it's a hands-on exam. I've known a ton of people that have passed it the first time. It sets up a good general knowledge of Kubernetes that will certainly prepare you for taking on larger Kubernetes projects in the future, and certainly prepares you for taking the other Kubernetes exams. So yeah, good luck, and you can certainly pass it the first time. It's, again, not an impossible exam, and hey, take advantage of that for a retake if you can. But that's all I have.
Awesome. Tyler, this was great. This was a great way to wrap up our certified Kubernetes administrative exam series. I'm going to pause just in case there are any last minute questions, but if not, we can call it good. Maybe just remind people, if they want to reach out, if they have questions after the fact, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can reach out to me again on LinkedIn under Tyler Hatton. You can reach out to me on t@tyler.sh. That's my email, or my Twitter is tlrhtn. So all that was at the beginning of the presentation, but certainly reach out to me on all those 3 different resources. And if you have any questions around the exam or any of the Kubernetes exams, I'm always happy to help out.
Awesome. Thanks again very much. Thanks everybody for tuning in. If you're live, remember you can check this all out on our YouTube channel. If for some reason you stumbled onto this video on YouTube without seeing any of the others, just head over to our YouTube page. There's a playlist where you can view them in order. And before you know it, you'll know everything you need to study to prep for the CKA exam. We don't cover everything in terms of content, more along the lines of what you need to learn to prep for the exam. And this is a great way to end it. So thanks again, Tyler.
Thank you.
All right, let's see if I can find the end recording button quickly tonight.
As the gift says, you can do it.
I did it. Goodbye.